Speaker of the United States House of Representatives from 1995 to 1999. He represented Georgia's 6th Congressional District as a Republican member from 1979 to 1999. The other half of our panel discussion today, Senator Rick Santorum. Senator from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and Senator Santorum was also the chairman of the Senate Republican Conference. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. Now, I have to put this out there today because we had a debate, and this is actually fun because we could get comments from the last one and we can tweak how we do it. Now, last time, I have to say, some people said, make sure they stay to the point. Make sure they keep to the point. So this time, we're going to make sure you stay to the point. And in this one, we're going to be focused, as we did on the last one, on the Constitution of the United States. We're going to be focused on a document that seems to be playing less and less of a relevant role in government today. And we're going to see what you think about this and think about some of the issues. And I'm going to start with you, Senator Santorum. And I really want to get into this issue of the temptation factor. You become President of the United States. You want to grow the executive. You want to grow your influence, grow the power. How are you going to resist that and shrink the size of government in a constitutional way?
Well, I mean, again, I always say just look at experience and look what you did when you had the ability to do something about that. And you know, my voting record was coming from a state like Pennsylvania, which is one of the most, well, let's say, purple states in the country, very much a swing state. There's a tremendous amount of pressure, and I'm sure Newt can share this with you. There's a tremendous amount of pressure to grow the government. For every one person that comes in and says, you know, we'd like you to cut this, there's 100 plus who want something from the federal government, believe it's the federal government's responsibility. And so there is that at probably every level. I'm sure there's Speaker O'Brien here who will tell you that's true here in New Hampshire. But what you try to do is you focus on what's important. And what I tried to do when I was in the Senate, I believe that it is the principal role of the government is national security. It's one of the reasons I got on the Armed Services Committee, to focus on trying to make sure that we have the dollars that we need to protect this country. It's the first obligation of the president is to do that under Article 2. And so making sure we have a strong defense and focus on sufficiency. That's why there's a lot of calls out there to cut the national security budget. I don't believe we should. I think that's one area of the government that we need to, particularly given what's happening in the world today, we need to not only maintain, but we need to improve the quality of our force, in the sense that we just don't have enough people in that force right now to keep up the operational tempo that's necessary for the country. So we need to improve our Navy. We need to improve with more ships. We need our aircraft. There's a lot of areas that we need work. And I know Newt and I have both signed on to a group called Strong America Now, which is putting in a program called Lean Six Sigma to get more efficiency. It's been used already in the federal government, in the Defense Department. I would use it more extensively to squeeze the waste out of the programs, and target more resources. On the other issues you look at, I think both of Newt and I would say that there's too much that the federal government does right now that can be and should be done by the states. I've said that Medicaid, Social Security, Medicaid, food stamps, housing programs, education and training programs, all those programs should be done with what I worked on, and Newt did too, when we were in the House, and then subsequently I was in the Senate. Welfare, aid to families with dependent children. We block granted those programs. We put a work requirement in place. We put a time limit on it, and we sent it back to the states and said, "State, this is your responsibility, not ours." And all of those things we can do and should do. But you look at what not only is constitutional, and none of those areas are specifically laid out in the Constitution for the federal government to do. But it's simply not these are programs that are basically administered by states anyway, and the federal government is trying to micromanage what states already do. And those are the kinds of programs you need to look at and send back to the states. And of course, the final one, and the biggest one, is public education. When I came to the Senate, probably less when I came to the Senate, I think we were spending 3% of the overall budget on education was spent by the federal government. Now it's up to between 10 and 11%, and the quality of education has gone down. We need to eliminate those funds coming from the federal government, give this authority to the states, back to the states, and again, try to limit what the role of the federal government is. Those are just some examples, and you do it by, not only what the Constitution says, but you make the case to the American public that this is the best way to provide these services, and that are more customized to the people in their states and their communities.
All right, Speaker Gingrich, how would you look at that 10th Amendment and say, I'm going to downsize the executive, I'm going to give power back to the states?
Well, first of all, if you go to Newt.org, you'll see an initial draft of a proposed 21st century contract with America, which we'll finalize by September 27th, the anniversary of the original contract. And item number 10 is the 10th Amendment. And we are going to build out, in fact, I've talked to the speaker here, and I've talked to a number of people in New Hampshire about finding from all around the country the pieces that ought to go back home and sort of a first wave of enforcing the 10th Amendment. But I think there's something deeper, and something which relates directly to the rise of the Tea Party movement. Government ultimately is shaped by politics. That is, if you can't politically do something, you're not going to be able to get the government to do it. And so politics has a very powerful defining impact in government. But politics is shaped by culture. What is it people believe, and how do they believe it? The great challenge for all of us has been the rise of an alternative vision of America, which is sort of captured to some extent by the Occupy Wall Street gang, and the idea that there's a 99% of the 1%. It's captured by people who believe that sleeping in parks is a reasonable sign of protest, and they never ask who paid for the parks. It is captured in the idea that students ought to be getting a good grade for self-esteem, even if they can't read the diploma. And the idea that we ought to give people money for 99 weeks to do nothing, because after all, otherwise they would be doing nothing without the money. And that would make them feel better. I mean, just go through all the cultural things we come to. This campaign, I believe, is a cultural campaign which leads to a political consequence, which then changes the government. And one of my thematics has been to say to people that I don't ask anyone to be for me. Because if you're for me, you're going to vote, go home and say, I hope Newt fixes it. I ask people to be with me for 8 years, because if you shrink the Washington bureaucracy, if you implement the 10th Amendment, and you really shrink the Washington bureaucracy, you have to grow citizenship. You have to replace the vacuum. And one of the great challenges of conservatism has been that it knew what it was against, but it didn't have a very good formula of what it was for. And what the Tea Parties have done that is really helpful is they have reasserted the importance of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution as living current documents. And that leads to a whole range of things. This one, I'll give you an example. If you go to Newt.org, there's a paper on rebalancing the judiciary. And I think it's the boldest statement of taking on the judiciary since Lincoln's first inaugural address, defying the Supreme Court in the Dred Scott decision. And Lincoln said, to believe that 9 people could change the law would be to give up all of our freedoms. And I think if you get a chance to read it, you'll have a sense of how bold I'm prepared to be and how decisive I'm prepared to be. I'll just give you one quick example. Jefferson, in 1802, passes the Judicial Reform Act, in which 18 out of 35 federal judges have their offices abolished. They're not impeached. They're told, as of today, your office has, and you have no salary, you have no court, you have no clerk, go home. It's over half. Several of them try to file a lawsuit saying it's unconstitutional. And they go into the remaining 17 judges who say to them, are you crazy? If we accept this lawsuit, Jefferson will abolish our court. And they couldn't get any judge to take the case. Now, the only reason I cite that goes back to the 10th Amendment. If you create a national majority which understands that it intends to dismantle much of Washington and return it home, and that majority is serious, you can create precisely the wave of change that Jefferson, Jackson, Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt did, and that Reagan started, but we were not able to dig deep enough and complete, because we were frankly busy beating the Soviet Empire. But now I think we can turn to home and get the job done.
Senator Santorum, I want to ask you about something.
GrokTV.